In my family, appearances are everything. So for my sister's wedding, my parents' gift was nothing short of a spectacle, $1 million investment to launch her own company. When they offered to pay for my simple wedding, I thought it was a miracle. It wasn't. It was the bait in a beautifully wrapped trap. My name is Ava, and I'm 28. Before I dive into my story, it would mean the world to know I'm not just speaking into the void. If you're here, just say, I'm listening in the comments, or maybe tell me what city you're tuning in from. I love seeing how far a single story can travel. Don't forget to follow along as I unpack this journey, where the carefully hidden secrets of a perfect family finally come to light. Sometimes just knowing one other person is listening makes all the difference. Thank you for being that person for me today. And now, this is what happened. My laboratory is my sanctuary. It's a quiet, sterile world of glass, beakers, and stainless steel, a place where truth can be distilled, measured, and understood. Here, amidst the hundreds of tiny brown bottles, I am the master of my own universe. I orchestrate symphonies of scent, blending top notes, heart notes, and the all-important bass notes that give a fragrance its soul. You have to understand all three layers to know the truth of a scent. Most people I've found never get past the surface. Today, I was working with my father, not in person, but in essence. With a glass pipette, I let a single viscous drop of birch tar fall onto a pristine white blotter strip. The scent that bloomed in the air was smoky sharp and profoundly familiar leather. I added a touch of cured tobacco, absolute. And there he was, Richard Davies captured in a scent. The smell of his corner office, his expensive car, his entire aura of unquestionable authority. The fragrance triggered it, as it always did. A memory short and sharp as a shard of glass flashed behind my eyes. I'm 7 years old, standing in a sun-drenched field behind our Boston home. My older sister, Olivia, 12, and already radiant, is sitting atop a living, breathing pony, its coat the color of honey. Her laughter rings out across the lawn. My father is holding the reins, beaming with a pride so bright it's almost hard to look at. Then he turns to me. In his other hand, he holds a small, exquisitely carved wooden horse. It's a perfect replica down to the tiny leather saddle. But it's cold. Static. I remember the feel of the splintery wood against my small palm, the hollow space in my chest where the warmth of a living thing should have been. The chime of the lab door pulled me back to the present. Adrian stepped inside, bringing with him the crisp autumn air and a smile that always reached his eyes. He was the only person who could enter my sanctuary without disrupting the delicate balance of things. There you are, he said, his voice a warm counterpoint to the clinical silence. He kissed my temple, his familiar scent of sandalwood and clean cotton, grounding me instantly. Creating magic. Trying to bottle a ghost, I murmured, setting the blotter strip down. He glanced at the dark oils I'd been working with. He knew. He always knew. Putting on the armor again, are we? A faint smile touched my lips. It was our code, the emotional shield I built before any mandatory family event. No, I said, turning to face him. Just choosing the right fragrance for the evening. His expression softened with understanding. Well, speaking of the evening, don't forget the celebratory dinner for Olivia this weekend. Your mother called me. A friendly reminder. The breath caught in my throat for just a second. I was a master in this room, a creator, an artist in control of every element. but the mere mention of a family dinner made me feel like that 7-year-old with the wooden horse all over again. Vulnerable. Adrian gently took my hand. Hey, we'll go. We'll smile. We'll eat the expensive food. And we'll be home by 10. A standard mission. I squeezed his hand, grateful for his solidarity. A standard mission, I agreed. Just as I let the breath out, my phone buzzed on the steel countertop. A text from my mother, Eleanor. Wear the blue dress, darling. You'll look so lovely standing next to Olivia. There it was. Not just a suggestion, but a direction, a placement next to Olivia. Never in the spotlight, always in the supporting role. A familiar, cold annoyance pricked at my skin. The evening hadn't even begun, and the stage was already being set. The restaurant was the kind of place where wealth wasn't just displayed, it was inhaled. The air at Aria was thick with the scent of money, a complex blend of vintage wine, expensive perfume, and the subtle buttery aroma of truffle oil. Silverware clinked against porcelain like delicate wind chimes, and the low murmur of Boston's elite served as background music. For my family, it was a natural habitat. For me, it was a foreign country, where I was a tourist with a poorly translated phrasebook. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Davies, held court at the center of a plush, semicircular booth. My father, with his perfectly tailored suit and booming voice, was recounting a story about closing a deal on the golf course with a state senator. My mother, elegant and composed in pearls and silk, would nod and smile at the appropriate moments, a master of social grace. And Olivia, my sister, sat beside her glowing. She was the star of the evening, and she played the part to perfection. She and her new fiancé, a blandly handsome man named Carter, from another family of equal standing, were the very picture of a power couple. Adrian and I were the audience. We listened as the conversation flowed from mergers and acquisitions to charity galas and summering in the Hamptons. And your little perfume shop is still doing well. Ava, my father asked, finally turning to me. It was the same question he always asked, his tone laced with a faint, dismissive amusement. My studio is doing very well, thank you, I said, keeping my voice even. I'm actually developing a signature scent for a hotel chain. How charming! My mother added, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. A fascinating little hands-on business. I felt Adrian's hand find mine under the table. He gave it a reassuring squeeze. Olivia, ever the budding CEO, leaned forward and sniffed the air around me. That scent you're wearing is unique, Ava. Very complex. She paused, letting the compliment land before delivering the blow. Perhaps a bit niche. It wouldn't work for the mass market, of course. It was her way of reminding me that I created art while she was being groomed to build an empire. The conversation moved on, and I faded back into the scenery. When the waiter brought out dessert, there were 2 plates of crème brûlée and 1 small bowl of sorbet for me due to my nut allergy. My father, engrossed in conversation with Carter, unthinkingly picked up the sorbet and slid it in front of Olivia, a small, thoughtless gesture that screamed volumes. Olivia, without looking up, pushed it back toward me. The exchange took less than 3 seconds, a silent transaction of habit and hierarchy. Then came the main event. Richard cleared his throat, tapping a spoon against his wine glass. The entire table fell silent. As you all know, he began, his voice resonating with pride. We are here to celebrate Olivia and Carter, but we are also here to celebrate the future. He looked at Olivia, his eyes shining. Eleanor and I have always believed in investing in our children. So, as an engagement and wedding gift to secure her future, we will be providing Olivia with $1 million in seed capital, along with my full network of contacts to launch her own luxury brand marketing agency. A collective gasp went through the table. Carter looked ecstatic. Olivia's eyes welled with perfectly composed tears. It was a staggering gift, a kingdom handed to her on a silver platter. I felt the familiar ache in my chest, the dull throb of being the footnote in my family's grand narrative. I plastered on a smile and joined the chorus of congratulations. Just as I was receding back into my shell, my mother did something unexpected. She leaned across the table, bypassing Olivia, and took my hand. Her grip was firm, her eyes locked on mine with a startling warmth. "Don't you worry, my love," she whispered, her voice, a low, intimate murmur, just for Adrian and me to hear. "When your day comes, your father and I will certainly not let you be at a disadvantage. Your happiness is our happiness too." The words hung in the air, a fragile, shimmering promise. For the first time in a long time, a dangerous, reckless flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe this time would be different. Hope is a dangerous substance, especially for someone who has learned to live without it. When Adrian proposed to me 2 months later on a quiet evening in our apartment, with nothing but the city lights as our witness, the joy was pure and untainted. It was ours. But when it came time to tell my parents, I braced myself for the usual polite but distant enthusiasm. Instead, I was met with a tidal wave of support that left me stunned. A wedding, my mother exclaimed over the phone, her voice brimming with genuine excitement. "Oh, Ava, darling, we are absolutely thrilled." A week later, at their cavernous Beacon Hill home, my father sat us down in his study. He poured us all a ridiculously expensive scotch and made his declaration. "You two are not to worry about a single penny." He said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're planning a modest affair around 40,000? You said, consider it done. This isn't about money, Ava. This is about a father's love for his daughter." I was speechless. Adrian, ever my protector, started to politely decline, but I placed a hand on his arm. For once, I wanted to accept. I wanted to believe, and they made it so easy to believe. They dove into the planning with a fervor I had only ever seen them apply to Olivia's achievements. My mother, who had always dismissed my work as a charming hobby, spent an entire afternoon with me at a high-end florist, passionately debating the merits of Casablanca lilies versus gardenias to create the perfect olfactory ambiance. She even remembered a rare Japanese orchid I'd once mentioned wanting to distill, suggesting we incorporate it into my bouquet. It was a small detail, but it felt monumental, a sign that she was finally truly listening. My father, the consummate businessman, took charge of the contracts. He met with the venue manager at the Boston Harbor Hotel, and with a few phone calls, managed to negotiate a deal that included a complimentary suite and an upgraded menu. "That's how you take care of family," he boasted, clapping Adrian on the back. The old familiar skepticism began to melt away, replaced by a cautious, sun-warmed optimism. I started to open up, sharing my vision for the day, my ideas for the ceremony. They listened, they nodded, they contributed. For the first time, I felt less like a satellite orbiting their world and more like a part of the family constellation. "I'm happy for you, Ava." "Truly," Adrian said one evening, as we looked over catering menus. "But It's just so unlike them. Maybe they're changing, I replied, trying to convince myself as much as him. People can change, right? The illusion was almost perfect. During a cake tasting, my mother recounted a story from my childhood. I'd long forgotten about a time I'd tried to make a perfume for her out of rose petals from the garden. She told it with such warmth and specific detail that it brought tears to my eyes. In that moment, sitting in that pristine bakery, I felt a sense of belonging so powerful, it almost ached. The long sought harmony seemed to finally be within my grasp. The only discordant note came a week before the wedding. A call from Olivia. "You've got them wrapped around your little finger, haven't you?" she said, her voice a sharp, brittle thing over the phone. "I've never seen them pour this much energy into anything, let alone your little wedding." There was a pause. "Just be careful, little sister." I dismissed it as simple jealousy. Olivia wasn't used to sharing the spotlight. I was too high on the novelty of my parents' affection to see her words for what they were, not an expression of envy, but a warning. A single dark cloud on the horizon of my perfectly blue sky. Our wedding day was perfect. It wasn't a spectacle like Olivia's would undoubtedly be. It was something better. It was us. We held the ceremony in a sunlit room at the hotel, overlooking the harbor. The air was filled with the scent of lilies gardenias and a hint of that rare orchid, a custom scentscape I had designed myself. It was intimate, warm, and filled with genuine love from our friends and Adrian's wonderful family. My parents played their parts flawlessly. My mother looking radiant, dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief during our vows. My father walked me down the aisle, his hand firm on my arm, whispering how proud he was. At the reception, they mingled with guests the very picture of doting, happy parents. For a few precious hours, I allowed myself to believe that this was real, that the harmony was here to stay. Then came the speeches. After Adrian's brother gave a heartfelt and funny toast, my father stood up, glass in hand. He commanded the room instantly. He began with charming anecdotes speaking of his pride in his two brilliant daughters. The room was captivated. He spoke of family, of legacy, and of the importance of investing in the future. A family's greatest investment is in its children's happiness, he said, his eyes finding mine across the room. He smiled warmly, and my heart swelled. He beckoned to an assistant who brought forward a handsome dark leather box. It looked important, timeless. "And so, Eleanor and I would like to make an investment in you, Ava. A gift to mark the beginning of your future." He walked over to our table and placed the box in front of me. The flashes of the photographer's camera seemed to intensify. I saw Adrian's hand tighten on my thigh under the table. I glanced at my mother. Her smile was bright but stretched thin at the edges. Olivia was studiously examining her wineglass. Small discordant details in an otherwise perfect picture. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the heavy lid of the box. I expected a piece of heirloom jewelry, perhaps the keys to a small summer cottage, something symbolic and filled with love. But the box was not lined with velvet. It was lined with confusion. Resting inside was not a gift. It was a document professionally bound in a leather folio. Gold embossed letters on the cover spelled out a phrase that made no sense. Marital investment agreement. A cold dread, sharp and swift, pierced through the warm haze of my happiness. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled to open the cover. My eyes scanned the cold, hard type. It was a list itemized down to the last dollar of every expense for the wedding. The venue, the flowers, the food, the photographer. At the bottom of the final page was the grand total, $40,000, and a single chilling sentence, repayment of investment principal to be completed within 60 months. The sound in the room seemed to fade to a distant hum. The scent of the lilies suddenly felt cloying, suffocating. The camera flashed again, capturing the exact moment my perfect day shattered into a million pieces. My father's smile, I noticed, never wavered. He stood there, watching me, waiting for me to understand the final brutal bass note of his love. The chapter of hope was over. The trap had been sprung. Time seemed to fracture in that moment. The photographer's flashbulb was a silent explosion of light searing the image onto my brain. The gold lettering on the leather folio, my mother's brittle smile, my father's placid, expectant face. The world beyond our table became a muted roar. Then, Adrian moved. He didn't shout or make a scene. His movements were economical and charged with a cold, quiet fury. He stood, placed one hand gently on my shoulder, and with the other, he reached across the table and closed the leather box with a soft, definitive thud. He picked it up. Then he looked at my father. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt, a silent declaration of war. Without a word, he gently pulled my chair back and helped me to my feet. He guided me away from the table, away from the wedding, away from the wreckage of my life, leaving behind a wake of stunned silence and the hardening features of my parents' faces. The ride home was a vacuum. The vibrant lights of Boston streaked past the car window, a watercolor painting smeared by an unseen hand. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Shock is a powerful anesthetic. It numbs everything, leaving only a hollow, ringing silence. The delicate scent of lilies and orchid on my dress, a fragrance I had spent months perfecting for this day, now felt thick and suffocating, the smell of a beautiful thing beginning to rot. Back in our apartment, the silence followed us, filling every corner. While Adrian made a few quiet, terse phone calls to his family, I moved like an automaton. I walked into our bedroom and methodically began to remove my wedding dress. Each pearl button was a small, hard reality. I slipped the silk from my shoulders, folded it with the precision of a soldier folding a flag, and laid it in its box. It was an act of control, the only one I had left. I shut the lid and pushed it into the back of the closet. Then, drawn by some homing instinct, I went to my small home laboratory and sat on the stool in the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 silent scents. Hours passed. The city outside grew quiet. Finally, Adrian appeared in the doorway, a silhouette against the hall light. He didn't try to hug me or offer platitudes. He just stood there, a quiet guardian. "What do you need from me right now?" he asked, his voice soft. I couldn't form words. I just shook my head. A tear, the first one, finally escaped and traced a cold path down my cheek. Just then, my phone, forgotten on the counter, lit up with a soft buzz. It was a text message from my mother. My fingers felt like lead as I reached for it. "I don't know what Adrian has been saying to you, but your little exit was deeply embarrassing for us all. Your father was only trying to teach you about responsibility. You've overreacted, Ava. It's time to grow up. No apology, no concern, only blame." The numbness receded, replaced by the first sharp sting of a war I hadn't known I was supposed to be fighting. I woke the next morning to a cold, crystalline clarity. The shock had burned away, leaving behind an anger so pure and quiet, it felt like a block of ice in my chest. There would be no screaming matches, no tearful confrontations. My family dealt in transactions, and I would respond in kind. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and navigated to my bank's website. With steady fingers, I initiated a wire transfer. Amount $40. Recipient Richard Davies. In the memo field, I typed a simple final sentence: investment principal repaid in full. Transaction closed. I hit confirm and felt a small, grim sense of satisfaction. Then I blocked my parents' numbers from my phone. My final act was to compose a brief email to the extended family who had attended the wedding. Thank you all for celebrating with us. Due to personal family matters, we will be foregoing our honeymoon and kindly request that you withhold any wedding gifts. We appreciate your understanding. It was a quiet, dignified signal that the perfect family was in fact broken. The response was swift. Unable to reach my phone, my father resorted to his work email, a clear power move. The message was long a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. He explained that the agreement had been a carefully orchestrated stress test of my financial maturity. He claimed they never intended to cash a check, and that, had I passed their test, by accepting the lesson with grace and humility, they were planning to tear up the document and surprise me with a Phase 2 reward of a far greater sum. He called it tough love, a necessary tool to forge a strong character. The email left me feeling nauseous. The second wave of the assault came in person. The bell at my perfume studio chimed, and Olivia swept in cloaked in an aura of righteous indignation. She wasn't here to mediate. She was here as an enforcer. Are you satisfied? She began, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Are you happy now that you've turned your wedding into a public spectacle and humiliated the entire family? I wasn't the one who humiliated me. Olivia, I replied, my voice dangerously calm. Oh, stop it. Stop playing the victim, she snapped. You think the world owes you something, that you're special. Our parents give you a life most people would kill for, and you repay them by throwing a tantrum over a piece of paper. It was a bit more than a piece of paper. It was a lesson she insisted parroting our father's email. They were worried you don't know how to manage money, that you're not like me. They were trying to help you. The sheer audacity of it, of Olivia, who had never earned an independent dollar in her life, lecturing me on financial responsibility, was breathtaking. You're right, I said, looking her dead in the eye. It was a spectacle, a circus, and our parents were the ringmasters. The jab hit its mark. Her face flushed with anger. You are making the same stupid, stubborn mistake Uncle Arthur did. Hard-headed and foolish Mom and Dad were trying to save him from himself. And now, they're trying to save you. The name hit the air and seemed to hang there, vibrating. Uncle Arthur, our father's estranged brother, a man who was nothing more than a ghost in family photos. A flicker of panic crossed Olivia's face. She had said too much. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, the bell chiming violently behind her. I stood frozen in the sudden silence, the scent of her expensive commercial perfume lingering in the air. Save him. The same mistake, her angry words, had given me something my father's calculated email had not a clue. A breadcrumb trail leading into the dark, forgotten history of our family. And I knew with absolute certainty that I had to follow it. Finding my Uncle Arthur wasn't difficult. He was a history professor at a small university west of the city, living a life so thoroughly disconnected from the Davies family's orbit that he might as well have been on another planet. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. The last time I'd seen him was at my grandmother's funeral, a quiet, sad-eyed man who seemed to observe the rest of us from a great distance. When I called him, there was no surprise in his voice, only a weary recognition. Ava, I was wondering when you might call. He invited me to his home in Cambridge, a narrow brownstone tucked away on a street lined with old trees. The contrast to my parents' sterile, modern mansion was immediate. His house smelled of old books, pipe tobacco, and brewing tea. Books were everywhere, stacked on floors, crammed into shelves overflowing from armchairs. It was the home of a man who valued substance over style. I heard about the wedding, he said, handing me a steaming mug. The family grapevine, while often inaccurate, is always fast. Then you know why I'm here, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Olivia said, she said I was making the same mistake you did. Arthur sighed, a deep, heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of 30 years. Mistake, he mused. They called it a mistake. I called it a choice. And then he told me the story. 30 years ago, as a young man, he had refused to join the family's lucrative investment firm, choosing instead to pursue a doctorate in history. His parents, my grandparents, had feigned support, offering to pay for his education as a gift. Then, just before his final dissertation, they presented him with a legally binding loan agreement for the full amount with interest. When he refused to be blackmailed into the family business, they cut him off. And my father, his own brother, had sided with them. He called me irresponsible. Arthur said, his eyes distant. He wrote letters defending them, said it was a necessary lesson in the realities of the world. He didn't just tell me. He showed me. He walked over to an old bookshelf and retrieved a small, heavy safe. With a click of the combination lock, he opened it. The smell of old paper and fading ink wafted out. He carefully removed a slim journal and a sheaf of yellowed letters tied with a faded ribbon. My mother's journal, he said, pushing it gently toward me. And these are letters from your father. I opened the journal first. My grandmother's elegant script detailed the disappointment of her youngest son and the strategy they had employed to guide him back to the correct path. Then, with trembling hands, I untied the ribbon on the letters. It was my father's handwriting, younger, more arrogant, but unmistakably his. I read the phrases and a chill snaked down my spine. A necessary test of character, tough love to forge a responsible man, a trial he must pass to prove his worth. They were the exact same justifications, the same cold, manipulative phrases he had used in his email to me just days ago. It wasn't just a similar tactic. It was the same script, performed by a new generation. I realized my father wasn't just my abuser. He was a product of this cycle, a former victim who had chosen to become a perpetrator. My uncle looked at me with profound sadness. They don't think they're being cruel, Ava. In their world, love and control are the same thing. Your father chose to accept their game and play it. I couldn't. I left my uncle's house hours later, clutching the small, heavy safe. The anger in my chest had been replaced by something else, a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't just about my feelings anymore. This was about a generational pattern of abuse. And I had the proof. The letters, the journal, they were my smoking gun. I felt a surge of power, a sense of righteous clarity. I believed that if I confronted my father with this undeniable, tangible history, he would have no defense. The truth, I thought, would finally force him to crumble. A final cathartic confrontation was coming, and this time, I was sure I would win. The grand reading room of the Boston Public Library was the perfect place for a civilized execution. Beneath the soaring arched ceiling and the watchful eyes of painted muses' voices were automatically hushed, and emotions were kept in check. It was neutral ground, a place of facts and histories. My father arrived looking exactly as he always did, impeccable, confident in control. He sat opposite me at a heavy oak table, a look of mild, paternal concern on his face. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I opened the small safe and carefully laid out its contents on the polished wood between us, my grandmother's journal open to the relevant page, his own letters from 30 years ago, and next to them, the printout of his recent email to me. I drew a line connecting a phrase in his old letter with the identical phrase in his new email. "This isn't a lesson, Dad," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through the library's reverent silence. "It's a repetition. You are doing to me exactly what your parents did to Uncle Arthur." He looked at the evidence. He read his own youthful, arrogant words. He read the cold, calculated entry in his mother's journal. He was silent for a long time. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not anger, not denial, but something that looked almost like pain. I held my breath, waiting for the confession, the apology, the collapse. It never came. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and then he did something I never could have anticipated. He refracted my truth. "You're wrong, Ava," he said, his voice a low, deeply persuasive rumble. "I'm not repeating their mistake, I'm fixing it." I could only stare, speechless. "Your Uncle Arthur failed the test," he continued, a weary sadness in his tone. "He was weak. He ran away from responsibility and settled for a small, inconsequential life. I, on the other hand, passed. I learned the rules of the world they were preparing me for. I stayed. I fought. I won. I built everything this family has today." He leaned forward, his gaze intense, pinning me to my chair. "I wasn't doing this to hurt you. I did this because I love you. I was testing you, Ava. Testing to see what you were made of, to see if you had the steel of a winner like me, or the fragility of a victim like your uncle. I was trying to give you the armor that Arthur refused to wear. I was teaching you how to survive, how to win in a world that doesn't reward weakness." His words were a masterful piece of psychological jujitsu. He didn't deny my evidence. He absorbed it, twisted it, and weaponized it against me. He transformed his cruelty into a twisted act of love, a harsh but necessary inheritance. He wasn't a villain repeating a cycle. In his story, he was the hero, trying to break it by forging a stronger daughter. I had come armed for a fight, but he had simply rewritten the terms of war. My smoking gun had become his teaching tool. My truth was now his twisted justification. He stood up, leaving the letters and the journal on the table as if they were artifacts from a life that no longer concerned him. "Think about what I've said, Ava. I was preparing you for the real world, not the one you read about in books." He walked away, his footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. I was left alone in the vast, silent library, the evidence of my family's toxic legacy laid out before me. But it no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a map of a labyrinth, to which my father had just added 1,000 new, confusing corridors. The truth hadn't set me free. It had just shown me the true, terrifying complexity of my prison. I left the library and walked back out into the noise and color of Boston, but I felt like I was encased in glass. My father's words had done more than just twist the truth. They had poisoned the very lens through which I saw the world. His warped logic was a labyrinth with no exit, and I spent the next few days lost in its corridors. The collapse came quietly, without a single dramatic crash. I went into my studio one morning, a place that had always been my sanctuary, and reached for a bottle of Bulgarian Rose Otto, a scent so complex and beautiful it felt like a living thing. I placed a drop on a blotter strip, raised it to my nose, and felt nothing. A faint, vaguely chemical sweetness was all that registered. I tried again with jasmine sambac, then with smoky vetiver, then with the deep resinous oud I loved. Nothing. The world of scent, my world, had been wiped clean, leaving behind a flat, gray, featureless landscape. My life's work, my identity, the very tool I used to understand the world had vanished. It was the physical manifestation of my father's victory. He had finally made me see the world as he did a place with no nuance, no depth, no hidden truth, just a hard, meaningless surface. Adrian found me hours later, just sitting on my stool surrounded by silent bottles. He saw the blankness in my eyes and understood. He didn't push or pry. In the days that followed, he became my anchor. He didn't try to solve the unsolvable puzzle of my family. He just made sure I ate, coaxed me out for quiet walks along the Charles River, and sat with me in the evenings when the silence in my head became too loud. He was the only real thing in a world that had become a phantom limb. One night, curled up on the sofa, the dam of my confusion finally broke. "Maybe he's right, Adrian," I whispered into the darkness. "Maybe I am weak." Uncle Arthur ran away and lived a quiet life. My father stayed, he played the game, and he has everything. Maybe I was just naive to think you could fight the way the world works. It was the lowest I had ever been, the moment I came closest to believing their version of reality. The next day, Adrian came home from work and placed the small, heavy safe from my uncle on the coffee table in front of me. "I don't know if your father is right or wrong, Ava," he said softly, his eyes full of a faith in me that I no longer had in myself. "But I know you. You see the truth in things. You're the best there is at finding the true essence. So stop listening to his story and do what you've always done." His words struck a chord deep inside me. I opened the safe. I still couldn't smell the musty scent of the old paper, but I could see the words. I spread the letters and the journal across the table. This time, I didn't read them as a daughter searching for an apology. I read them as a chemist analyzing a compound. I laid my father's old letters next to his recent email. I underlined repeated phrases with a red pen. A necessary trial. Tough love. Test of character. I saw the structure of the manipulation, the patterns of the gaslighting. It was cold, formulaic, and utterly predictable. A single clear thought cut through the fog in my mind. This isn't a philosophy. This is a script. And they've been reading from it for generations. Just as my mind began to clear, they must have sensed it. A predator knows when its prey is beginning to stir. My phone, silent for weeks, buzzed with a notification voicemail from Richard Davies. My parents were unblocked, a single concession to the sliver of hope that refused to die. With trembling hands, I played the message. It wasn't my father's usual booming, authoritative voice. This was a different man. His voice was tired, heavy, and it seemed to crack with emotion. "Ava," he began, followed by a long pause. "I've been thinking. A lot. And I was wrong. A father's biggest mistake is thinking he knows what's best for his child. I don't want to lose you, honey." Another pause. "Please, give us one last chance to talk. No lectures, no lessons, I promise. Just Your family. It was the perfect apology, the one I had craved my entire life. It was a masterful performance, targeting the exact frequency of my deepest desires. Against Adrian's gentle, worried counsel, I agreed. I had to know. I had to see the end of the play. The stage was set at their Beacon Hill mansion. When I walked in, it was a scene of perfect contrition. My father, looking older and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him, stood by the fireplace. My mother, her eyes artfully red-rimmed, came forward to give me a hesitant hug. Even Olivia was there, perched on a sofa looking unusually subdued. They offered me tea. They spoke in soft, gentle tones. They asked about my work, about Adrian. It was a flawless portrayal of a family desperate to mend its wounds. Then my father cleared his throat for the final act. He sat opposite me and slid a crisp blue envelope across the polished mahogany table. "We know words aren't enough, Ava," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "Your mother and I, we want to make things right." I opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check. The number, printed in bold black ink, was $100,000. "This was the real wedding gift we had always planned for you," he said softly. "My method was wrong, deeply wrong, but the love was real. Please accept this. Let it be a symbol of a new beginning. Let's just put all of this behind us and be a family again." My mother was crying softly now. Olivia was staring at me, her expression unreadable. The room was silent, thick with the weight of their expectation. The check lay on the table between us, a bridge back to them, or a final golden chain. The hope for reconciliation, for the happy ending I had always dreamed of, was so close I could almost taste it. I stared at the check, at the zeros that promised to smooth over every crack and silence every inconvenient truth. I looked at the three faces watching me, a tableau of perfectly rehearsed remorse, and in that moment of profound silence, something shifted inside me. It started as a flicker, a ghost of a sensation, a faint, sharp note cutting through the gray fog in my mind. It was the lemon in my mother's tea. Then, another scent bloomed, the old familiar leather and tobacco from my father's armchair. And another. Suddenly, the world of scent rushed back in a dizzying, overwhelming flood. My sense of self, my superpower, my truth came roaring back to life. And I could smell everything. I could smell the cloying sweetness of my mother's Chanel No. 5, a desperate attempt to mask the sharp, anxious scent of fear that clung to her. I could smell my father's signature cologne, but underneath it, for the first time, I detected a cold, metallic bass note of pure, unyielding calculation. And from Olivia, beneath her trendy, fruity perfume, I could smell the faint, sour note of resentment, the unmistakable odor of someone playing a part they were forced to learn. They weren't a family seeking reconciliation. They were a board of directors making a final offer to close a difficult deal. The check wasn't an apology. It was a non-disclosure agreement. My breath came out in a slow, steady sigh. The hope I had clung to for so long didn't shatter this time. It simply dissolved like a top note evaporating to reveal the truth beneath. I was finally free. I looked at my father, not with anger or hurt, but with a quiet, devastating clarity. I didn't touch the check. I gently pushed it back across the table toward him. His face tightened. "Ava, you've taught me my whole life that everything has a price," I said, my voice clear, and even without a single tremor. "Today, I finally understand the lesson." I met the eyes of each of them in turn. The price of being in this room, of being a part of this family, is my own truth. And for the first time in my life, I find that price is too high. I stood up. There were no more tears to cry, no more arguments to win. I wish you all well, I said. And the words were not a curse, but a release. I was releasing them. I was releasing myself. I turned and walked toward the grand entryway, my footsteps echoing in the sudden vast silence of the mansion. I didn't look back. I pulled open the heavy oak door, stepped out into the crisp Boston air, and closed it softly behind me, sealing away a lifetime of ghosts. It wasn't a victory in their game. It was my refusal to play any longer. 6 months later, sunlight streamed through the large floor-to-ceiling windows of my new studio in the Seaport District. The space was 3 times the size of my old one, filled with light air and the quiet, humming potential of 1,000 fragrant possibilities. Adrian walked in, carrying 2 containers of takeout and that same easy smile. He kissed me, his familiar sandalwood scent, a comforting anchor in my new, expansive world. We ate our lunch sitting on stools surrounded by the beautiful, organized chaos of my work. We had built our own family, its foundation laid not on transactions or expectations, but on the simple, unshakable truth of mutual respect. A small package had arrived that morning, bearing a university return address. I opened it. Inside, nestled in cotton, was a small, gnarled piece of root and a tiny vial of dark, viscous absolute. It was orris root, one of the most precious and patient materials in perfumery, taking years to cultivate and cure before it reveals its true violet-like heart. A handwritten note from my Uncle Arthur was tucked inside. For new beginnings that need deep roots. I smiled a real, unburdened smile. Later that afternoon, I was working on a new creation, my own signature scent. Adrian watched as I carefully blended the final accords. "What's this one called?" he asked. "Sovereign," I said. "And what does sovereignty smell like?" I dipped a blotter strip and handed it to him, then dabbed a small drop on my own wrist. I closed my eyes and inhaled. It was all there. A sharp, bright top note of aldehydes, like a sudden clarifying truth. A resilient heart of magnolia, a flower that symbolizes dignity and perseverance. And finally, a deep grounding base of ancient oak wood and rich, dark earth. The scent of my own independence, my own roots planted by my own 2 hands. It was the scent of my future, and it was all mine. Some storms are not ours to endure. True strength isn't measured by how much pain we can carry, but by the moment we find the courage to walk out of the rain. The most profound healing begins when we stop trying to fix a broken home and start building our own shelter founded on peace and self-worth. If you stayed with me through this journey, thank you. Drop a heart in the comments or share where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far truth can travel. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to tell, and I'd be honored to have you here when I do.